The United States government may be granted the opportunity to access data that's stored in other countries. A case between the government and Microsoft is currently being heard by the US Supreme Court. Now, this all started 5 years ago when Microsoft refused to hand over to authorities emails that related to a drug trafficking investigation. It claims that the data was stored on servers that are physically located in Ireland, and US law does not stretch outside its own borders. But Washington argues, as the tech giant is an American company, it should provide the data. Microsoft says that if it loses, foreign states would then have the right to access data that's based in the US. The tech giant claims the credibility of all IT companies is at stake.
The reality is that people will not use technology they do not trust. We need to sustain their trust, and part of sustaining their trust is giving people confidence that their legal rights under their legal systems will in fact be respected, including by the United States.
OK, let's discuss this in more detail now. I'm joined on the line by political activist George Barda and Paul Viollis, CEO at Viollis Group International. To you first, if I may, Paul, what should we be worried about here if Microsoft loses the case? What are the implications?
Well, you know, the issue that Microsoft is pounding on is this alleged constitutional right to privacy in the United States deal. And that's the one thing that people keep going back and forth on, is the right to privacy, the right to privacy. I personally, and the way that we really need to be looking at this, is we need to find a balance. And the balance needs to be between privacy and communicating in a manner in which people feel, you know, is unfettered. And then looking at the right of, or the responsibility of government to protect against groups such as ISIS that are using mediums such as that to plan, direct, train terrorist attacks. So there has to be a balance between the two. OK, George, I mean, it's an obvious argument many people will make. If you've got nothing to hide, what's the concern? But there will be an argument, and I'm sure you'll give it to us.
I think the key issue, speaking from Europe, is that, you know, and many other places, that there have been extended struggles over the very sort of vexed and I think what will be an increasingly important question of privacy on the internet. And what the judgment, if it goes with the Justice Department, would mean is that the result of those struggles in terms of domestic legal frameworks that are designed to protect online users' privacy will then essentially just be ridden roughshod over by the judgment. Now, there's a piece of legislation coming into the Congress potentially called the Cloud Act, which might make all of this moot, and it may be that Congress decides in passing that law that's okay and that the government can do that anyway. But certainly, speaking from a sort of international point of view, to have a court decision that makes a mockery of you know, years-long struggles to protect internet privacy is a major problem.
Is that something that George just mentioned there, Paul? Perhaps the biggest problem, that legislation is just so old, it hasn't caught up with the internet and with the cloud, and that this needs a legal update?
I believe that George is completely on point, without question. And no one that's going to look at this prudently is going to say that government should have unfettered access to the internet. And as well, you know, we must safeguard our right to be able to communicate over the internet with a certain degree of privacy, and with significant privacy, I would even go so far as to say. But the fact remains that government needs to take a stronger role in monitoring certain activity on the internet and in social media if we are going to try to stay in line and somewhat ahead, if we can, with groups such as ISIS, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, that are using the internet and that are using social media as a highway of transporting information to plan and execute terrorist attacks. So it's a matter of creating a balance between, as George said, that internet privacy and the ability to communicate, as well as the government's right to be able to monitor preemptively to protect society in general.
George, what about that argument? Because, you know, some people might argue that terrorists are winning that battle when it comes to organising attacks in major cities. Very hard to stop them doing so. Wouldn't this be a very useful weapon for the law authorities?
I mean, as I understand it, there are there are many sort of covert means of communicating effectively online if you want to that wouldn't be touched by this judgment. In the particular case that's at issue, the Irish government has been very clear that it would, had there been a request from the Justice Department for the information that is stored on these servers in Ireland, they would absolutely have responded by releasing that data. And I mean, the UK, for instance, has recently signed what's called an MLAT, Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, so that authorities in the UK and the US can coordinate on these matters. But I think it's in a world where yes, it's arguably a multipolar world with the rising power of China, etc. But the US is effectively still a kind of imperial power, and given that people across the world are using social media, most of the major companies for which are based in the US, judgments like this, if it goes the wrong way, would essentially mean that anybody using a US social media account can essentially just have all their data immediately accessed by the US Justice Department. And as we know from the revelations of Edward Snowden and others, there are huge questions to be asked in terms of the legitimacy of US snooping and the interests that are being served. And certainly as a political activist that has genuine cause to fear governments essentially using internet spying to undermine effective democratic dissent, I think this is a really important issue that needs to be kept at the forefront of the discussion.
Let's bring Paul in on this, if I may, George, because I think it's a really good point you've made. Paul, isn't Big Brother here? And if it goes their way, this will be the US government will be Big Brother. You've got Microsoft make computers, they make phones, they make tablets, all the other big US social media giants. They'll be able to just pick and choose which of anybody in the world's information they want to delve into and go through anyone's sordid details and secrets that they thought were private, they thought were secretly hidden in a cloud that's actually not a cloud at all.
George raises a legitimate concern, and no matter what side of the argument that you are on with this, that's a legitimate concern. And whenever you empower government to the extent that they have the ability, they meaning any government, in this case we're talking about the United States government, we could talk about anybody, because all governments, as George said, all governments snoop. It's just we've been doing it for hundreds of years. But it's important to understand that what we're looking to do with this is not to have complete, unfettered, as I said before, access to the internet, but enough access so that there are keywords, phrases, documents, pictures, etc., that will be used algorithmically to detect issues and incidences preemptively that law enforcement, that military, that government can intervene on. It's not a carte blanche decision to say, okay, now you have complete access to the internet, to social media, but to give them access so that they can, on a regular basis, if certain things come up, if certain things are said, if certain things are communicated, pictures presented, where they can intervene at that point in lieu of going through the arduous process of going through search warrants and going to the court and getting permission to do it.
I just want to come back to George. George, you've got just under 1 minute, and I just want to put that to you. So if we're leaving it to the discretion of big internet companies and the US government, both of whom, let's be honest, have let us down when it comes to privacy and telling the truth in the past, can we trust them?
I think that my fellow debater is raising generally significant points about when it's appropriate for law enforcement to be able to access information, but I think there are very large questions going forward in that the internet offers possibilities for snooping on virtually every single aspect of anybody's interaction with any other individual on the planet, and any decision that essentially opens the floodgates into a sort of free-for-all where governments, on the basis of the idea that they're doing something worthwhile, can look at anything they want, I think raises...
I do apologise, George, we're going to have to wrap you up there, I'm afraid. We're out of time. I wish we could go on longer, but apologies. Political activist George Barda, Paul Viollis, CEO at Viollis Group International. Many thanks, guys.